And joining us now from Toronto is David Matlow. Welcome back to the CJN Daily. Good to see you again.
Nice to be back. Hi, Ellen. Thank you for having me come back.
We should tell the listeners and viewers that I'm actually in David's home museum in another room, and we're recording this because we want to see the artifacts that he's brought with him to Basel, and also to talk a bit about some of the items that are relevant to this big conference that is happening in Switzerland, the 125th anniversary of the First Zionist Congress. So David, before we get into the specifics of what you're going to be saying, tell us a little bit about the whole event and what is being planned for this anniversary.
Well, a momentous event in the history of the State of Israel and Jewish history was the First Zionist Congress, which was convened by my hero, Theodor Herzl, in 1897. It took place in Basel, Switzerland in August of 1897. And this was the first time in 2,000 years that Jewish people got together to have a formal meeting to discuss their future. And that's where the goal of Zionism was established. That's where the World Zionist Organization was established. And that started the Jewish people on the road to creating a Jewish state within about 50 years after that event. So it's the 125th anniversary of that momentous event, and the World Zionist Organization has organized a meeting. I call it Woodstock for Herzl fans, that will take place in Basel starting on Sunday, August 28th.
Okay, so you mentioned Woodstock for Herzl fans, but are they actually doing it in the same place, the same buildings? What do you know about that?
It's a conference. There's two conferences going on at the same time. There is an impact summit for 125 young leaders who are in the world of impact in investing and impact social programs, as well as a leadership summit of about 500 people. It's taking place in a convention center, but the whole event concludes with a gala in the Congress Hall, the precise place where the First Zionist Congress took place, and it will include the involvement of the President of the State of Israel, who's coming for this event.
Have they made that hall into a museum, or what is it used for in all these years?
It is like Carnegie Hall or Massey Hall. It's a concert hall, and it was the most prominent building at the time. It's been renovated a number of times. And in fact, when I was last there, which was in 2010, there was a plaque on the wall that said, like in the auditorium, there's only one plaque in a massive wall, and it says, "This is where the First Zionist Congress took place, Basel, 1897. And I understand it was recently renovated, but I'm pretty certain that that plaque will remain. The people in Basel understand the significance of that place and that city in the history of the State of Israel.
You know, when we were researching to have this conversation, the authorities in Switzerland seem to be very excited, supportive, welcoming to the Jewish delegates that are going to be coming. They understand as well the significance of what happened there, but they did mention that they're aware of security possible issues for 1,000+ Jews who will be traveling there. So how do you navigate going to a place where right now where Zionism is in the world? Are they expecting trouble, right?
I don't know if they're expecting trouble. I trust the Swiss authorities and the Israeli authorities to make sure it will be safe for everyone. Wherever Jewish people get together, wherever Zionists get together, there is that risk, and we have to protect ourselves, which frankly was the purpose of Zionism, where we can look after ourselves and not to be dependent on others. So sadly, 125 years into it, there is still hostility towards the Zionist dream. It's no longer a dream, it exists, but those who promote it, advocate it, love the State of Israel, support it, want to nurture it and improve it, comes with the territory that there'll be people who don't like that perspective on the world and try and interrupt it, try and disturb it, and we can't ever let that happen.
Well, let's talk about what Herzl, being the world's expert on Herzl, what do you think he would have made of the situation now going on in the world where there's so much anti-Zionism, Zionism equals racism, the new colonialism, that Zionists are being called colonialists in the new trope? How do you think he would have handled it?
Well, he would. I'll start with how he would have felt about it. The whole idea of Zionism, the whole idea of the Jewish state, the Zionist Congress was a solution to anti-Semitism. Herzl realized before many that there will always be anti-Semitism wherever we go in great numbers. We go to places where we find safety and security, and by virtue of the increased numbers, anti-Semitism ensues. And in fact, it was Max Nordau who, in his opening address at the First Zionist Congress, said something to the effect that anti-Semitism is nothing to do with what Jewish people do. And he used this quote, which I found fantastic. He essentially said, it's a well-known adage that if you want to drown a dog, first you have to conclude that the dog was insane. You have to find a rationale for that. But the true basis for it is you just want to drown the dog. And so he compared that to anti-Semitism. There is hatred of Jewish people regardless of what they do. And then you find a context, a pretext for it, which Herzl understood and Nordau understood, and it was well talked about at the First Zionist Congress, where Jewish people are either capitalists or they're communists. They either live together or try and integrate. It's whatever you want. You can find a reason to hate the Jewish people. And Herzl's idea was the only way to protect ourselves is to have our own country. And that worked amazingly effectively. Too late, we all know. But we all know that if there is risk to the Jewish people, we have an alternative that wasn't available to the Jews of Europe in the 1930s and the 40s. We have a place to go. And whether that's now Jews from Ukraine or previously from Ethiopia or Russia or the Jews from France, and heaven forbid, it should never be the Jews from North America that need that outlet. But in the back of our minds, we know that's there, and that started with the Zionist Congress in Basel. So there was a lot of discussion at the First Zionist Congress about anti-Semitism. Zionism was intended to be the solution to anti-Semitism. And the first day of the Congress, Max Nordau, who was a famous author and one of the earliest supporters of Herzl, spoke about the situation of the Jewish people throughout Europe. He essentially said wherever Jews were in number, they lived in misery. And he talked about anti-Semitism. And this quote, which he said at that time, is the most cogent explanation of anti-Semitism that I've been able to find. And he said it at the First Zionist Congress. He says that probably wisdom has long been acquainted with this psychological law and puts it in fairly expressive words. If you have to drown a dog, says the proverb, you must first declare him to be mad. All kinds of vices are falsely attributed to the Jews because one wishes to convince himself that he has a right to detest them. But the pre-existing sentiment is the detestation of the Jews. He's essentially saying all these pretexts, being communist, being capitalist, living alone, trying to integrate, whatever it might be, are just pretexts because you start with the premise that for whatever reason, there is hatred of Jews. And so we're experiencing that right now. Whatever it is that we do doesn't really much matter because there's a pre-existing inclination for anti-Semitism. So that was articulated at the First Zionist Congress by Max Nordau. It's something we still experience today.
Just before we move to the specifics of what you're going to bring and what you're going to show, what is left to do of Herzl's dream today? What's happening with Zionism today? What's unfinished?
Well, Herzl said that Zionism is an infinite ideal, and it will never be finished. And he also said that for him, Zionism means not just having a plot of land for his weary people, but to create a model society on that land. And so the work of Herzl is ongoing and will always be ongoing to make that country better, to be more moral, to be more equal. All countries are a work in process. Our country of Canada is, our southern neighbor for sure is, every country is. It's always a work in progress. And Zionism means to me continuing to believe and understand the magic and the wonder, the miracle that we live at a time where there is a Jewish state which our parents dreamed about and saw the realization of, and our grandparents might have seen the realization of, but our great-grandparents only dreamed of it. And it exists, and we cannot take it for granted. It's a miracle. It's magic. And Zionism now, to me, is keep in mind the magic. Remember the history. Remember how much better off we are because we have a state of Israel, and because we've always had it, we might take it for granted. And sometimes it's a bit of a hassle to be a supporter of Israel, but it's worth it because we're much, much worse off we would be if it didn't exist. And if we drop the ball on it, we do so at our peril. And the purpose of meetings such as this in Basel is to remind ourselves where it started not so long ago, why we have it, why we need it, and to continue to inspire us to work towards its betterment.
It's not lost on many people that the 125th meeting comes just a few months before the 75th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. Two very, very symbolic milestones, no?
Absolutely. And in fact, as you can play a little game with math, because Herzl said in his diary, wrote in his diary after the first Zionist Congress, in Basel, I founded the Jewish state. And he didn't mean it existed, but he meant that he imprinted in people's minds the possibility of the state of Israel, or what became the state of Israel, happening. And he went on to say, if I said this out loud now, people would think I'm crazy. But maybe in 5 years, and certainly in 50 years, people will know I'm right. So this was written in September of 1897, plus 50 years takes you to 1947, add 8 months. So it's 50 years and 8 months later. So Herzl was pretty close, not perfect. It's perfect in a lot of other things, but not in this. 50 years later, Israel existed. And so 125 minus the 50 gives you the 75, which is Israel's upcoming milestone birthday.
All right, so that's speaking about the conference specifically. You always do amazing treasure trove artifacts for the CJN and in your speeches around the world. What are you speaking about and what are you bringing?
So I have an opportunity. It's a real privilege to be. It's like the Super Bowl or the World Series for a Herzl geek like me to be able to give a presentation in Basel about Herzl and my collection. So I'll be talking about a few things. One is the imagery from the first Zionist Congress, and I'm holding up a postcard which was issued at the first Zionist Congress, and the images of it are people praying at the Western Wall, the Kotel, as well as a farmer planting seeds on his farm. And this was the image that Herzl wanted to convey. Being a landowner, working the land, and also preserving the religious context and the history and passion of the Jewish people. The other is he insisted that everyone who goes to the Congress wear a tuxedo. So that was fantastic business for the Sid Silver formal rental wear business in Basel, because people would come from, I picture it from Anatevka, and they had to go and rent a tuxedo in order to attend. And there's a composite picture. This is a postcard from 1898, made in New York, that I'm showing. But everyone in the picture, all the delegates, are wearing formal wear. Herzl's picture is the biggest and he's in the middle. And the participants in the Congress, they weren't just the audience. They were actors, in a drama. This was performative. This Congress was the parliament of the Jewish people meeting for the first time. And this was a picture, because Herzl was a playwright, he was a dramatist. This was a picture he wanted to imprint in the eyes of and minds of the world, that this was a formal business, a formal parliament. And interestingly, Zionism was also a democratic and progressive movement. It still is. People would challenge that assertion, but they would be wrong in doing so. At the first Zionist Congress, there were 14 women in attendance. They were non-voting observers at the first Zionist Congress. By the second Zionist Congress, 1 year later, women were full voting members. That was in 1898, 20 years before women could vote in Canada, 22 years before they can vote in the United States. And at the first Zionist Congress, the World Zionist Organization was established as a democratic entity, which essentially said, for every 100 members you have, you can appoint one delegate to the next Zionist Congress. So it was based on proportional representation. And people might know of the First Zionist Congress or Herzl on the balcony at the Three Kings Hotel in Basel. At the Second Zionist Congress, there were 22 congresses before Israel's independence in 1948. Herzl died after the sixth one, so he only attended the sixth. And the last thing I'll talk about is Herzl insisted that every word spoken at the Zionist Congress be recorded and minuted. So there are printed minutes of all the Zionist Congresses, because as there was at the time, and sadly is to this day, there is suspicion that Jewish bankers and powerful people in the back rooms are doing all kinds of nefarious business. And Herzl said, no, this is an open meeting. Members of the press can come and report on it. Elsewhere in my collection, I have the articles written in the New York Herald a few days later about what happened at the Zionist Congress, the first Zionist Congress, and also every word was spoken, was minuted. You could know exactly what was said.
All right, it's been great to talk to you about this, and I'm looking forward to hearing more on the treasure trove about your experiences. David, thanks so much for being on the CJN Daily.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.